A list of all the materials I'll be using will be in the description below. So I'm using the 4mm masking pen to begin with. I give it a really good shake because there's a cartridge inside, and then really give it a good tap to release the masking fluid. If you don't have one of these pens, don't worry. Just use ordinary masking fluid straight from the pot. Now I'm using this and I'm just going to coat each of the larger flowers with this masking pen. Once you've filled in most of your larger flowers, what I'm doing now, which is a bit of fun, I'm just using that little pen just to do lots and lots of little dots. And now I'm going to swap to this 0.7mm masking pen. Now this is going to give me some very, very fine lines. It will just be for grasses, stems, and very, very fine lines. Now what I'm doing is just using the indigo on its own. It's quite a pale little puddle here, and remember I'm painting wet on dry. I haven't wet the sky first, and I'm just painting this now down to the top of the trees. I'm using the Black Velvet size 10, and what I've done now is added a little bit more indigo. I felt it was a little bit pale. I just wanted it a bit darker just at the top, and I've used now a little puddle of yellow ochre, and I'm painting that large area of light yellowy grasses wet on dry using the size 10 brush. I'm just mixing up now some of the yellow ochre with the transparent brown oxide colour. That's a QOR colour, which is a really lovely colour, but if you don't have that, you could use burnt sienna. If you don't have yellow ochre, you could use raw sienna or even quinacridone gold. So I'm just painting this on now. It's a little bit of wet in wet here, and I'm using the size 10 brush, and it's going on really nicely. I'm putting those stronger tones towards the bottom of those grasses, giving my brush a good rinse now, and now I'm mixing up some of the indigo with the brown. It's a little bit more milkier, and I'm dropping this in now wet in wet, just to give that lovely dark just at the bottom of those grasses there. As you've seen there, the paint ran up too much, so I've just used my kitchen towel to stop it, and then I'm using my little plastic card to create some grasses, almost like drawing the paint out of the darkness there and bringing it up into the lighter area. It's quite an effective little technique. Now I'm going to paint some of the lighter grasses, so I'm starting off with the cadmium yellow, and I'm using a little bit of the ultramarine, so it's a really, really light green. I'm just using nice sort of strokes, putting this on, really loading the brush. It's a milky consistency. Always keep getting fresh paint. I can't say it enough, because it will make your painting look so much fresher and more transparent. So now I'm adding a little bit more ultramarine, just making this green slightly stronger because it's coming towards the foreground. So you want to have your tonal values a little bit stronger. So I'm using the brush in a sort of a zigzaggy method, sort of going up and down to create the look and feel of grasses without too much detail. Already looking at the painting now, it looks lovely and fresh. It's really capturing that sort of scene that is in the photograph there. So I'm just mixing up a little bit more ultramarine, just making the colour slightly stronger again, touch more yellow there, just really sort of building up those colours, you know, from the sort of the background being quite pale, and now these colours are a lot richer, a lot stronger. And also I'm trying to make the brush marks bigger so that everything is stronger and bigger, and it comes towards you, so it creates that depth that you want in your painting. Now I'm mixing the colours as I go. If you find this a little bit daunting, just mix up those colours beforehand so you've got them ready to hand, so you don't feel like you're being rushed. I quite like painting fast, as you know, and it's much more fun for me, and I'm used to painting this quickly. But if you find it's a little bit tricky, then prepare it all in advance. What I'm doing now is I've got a milkier colour now, it's slightly thicker, and I'm just putting some quite strong values in the foreground, making them sort of almost like long grasses and stems. And I'm using the ultramarine and the yellow still, but more ultramarine. So I'm using some of the brown now just to make this green even darker, using the ultramarine as well, just to kind of build up a creamier, darker colour for the grasses in the foreground, and I'm using the size 10 brush and just painting that damp into damp. Try not to be afraid of really loading your brush even at this stage. Always have plenty of paint on your brush. So I'm mixing up some indigo now. So I'm mixing that up with a tiny touch of brown, and I'm painting this with the size 6 brush, wet on dry, at the top here where these dark trees are. And this is what really attracted to me to this photograph as well, these lovely contrasting trees in the background. I love all the different shapes in this photograph. So I'm painting this, and I'm trying to sort of use the tip of the brush to cut into the grasses as well. Really take your time with this. It's quite a strong dark, and you don't want to be sort of slapping it on, as it were. What I did there is I diluted my brush just to dilute the paint and just sort of put the tops of the trees in there. So you've got these lovely sort of different sort of tonal sort of values of lighter and darker colours. So as you can see, I've continued painting on here. I've dropped a tiny little bit of the brown in there as well. I've really diluted my brush so I can just pale this colour away to the left hand side where the trees are. So I don't want any of that wash there. So I've just diluted everything away. So I'm going to paint the tree trunk in now. I'm just using the indigo wet on dry, and I'm using the size 6 brush, and it really holds lots and lots of paint, and I'm just carefully painting this tree trunk right down to the grasses, and I'm going to cut a little bit into the grasses as well so they look like they're going a little bit on above the bottom of the tree trunk. And I'm just carefully, I'm trying to on the right hand side here to kind of create little nodules and little bumps and things like that, so it makes it look a little bit more natural looking rather than a telegraph pole all smooth and straight. So on the left hand side here, I'm just pulling off a little bit of paint. So I want to make it look like the light is coming from the left. So I'm just pulling that off with a damp brush. You can see I'm wiping off the excess on the kitchen towel there and cleaning the brush. I'm using the tip of the brush to cut into that light below it so it looks like the grasses are growing above it. So I'm going to use my natural sponge now. When you're sponging, always wet it first, wring out all the excess water, and always use creamy paint. So I put on a very light green there, that's the ultramarine, and the yellow, and now I've just made it a bit darker, adding a little bit more blue. So I've mixed up a darker green now, that's the indigo and the yellow, and it's quite creamy, and I'm pressing really gently just to get that lovely texture of that tree behind. And I'm going to use my brush with the same colour now just to fill in a little bit more. I felt it had too much texture. And I'm using the tip of the size 6 brush just to put a few little loose leaves out on the right hand edge and just filling in a little bit with the brush there. So I've decided to use the plastic card just to draw out some of the paint, literally draw it out into little branches. So I'm using the wet paint. It's amazing, this technique, and it's really good fun. So what I'm doing now is mixing up some indigo and painting wet on dry. I've given the painting a good blow dry, and I just want to paint some of the darks at the top of this little meadow here, so it really makes the meadow stand out. So I'm just using the indigo and I'm just softening now the top of that so it doesn't have a hard edge, so you can just blend that with a damp brush, and I'm using a size 4 brush. So I've mixed up some of the indigo and the brown now, and I'm painting the sort of bottom or the top of the meadow there with that dark colour, and just again softening the top, but it's just to give a little bit more detail. And remember, this is wet on dry, and take your time with these little detailed areas, you know, really finesse them. So I'm going to use the similar technique on the grasses now. I've just mixed a little bit of the yellow with a tiny touch of ultramarine. I'm using the size 4 brush, and I'm just painting in these very pale grasses at the top of the meadow. I've just added a little bit of yellow ochre to that colour as well, just to give it a bit of variety of colour. And I'm using the tip of this brush. Literally, you're kind of painting blades of grass, but obviously not thousands, but just those little marks. The ones you want at the top of the meadow, you want them smaller, and as you gradually come nearer to the bottom end of the paper, the marks get bigger, the colours get warmer and stronger, the tonal value gets stronger, and just try to sort of vary the marks. Don't have them all straight in a row, have them sort of going left and right and up, and you know, sort of like almost like the wind is rustling through the grasses. Now I'm mixing up some ultramarine with that yellow ochre just to make another variety of darker green, and I'm painting this in the sort of middle ground of that little meadow there, and it's really therapeutic. It's good fun. I mean, you're kind of wet on dry. Some bits you might bump into a little bit of wet into wet or damp into wet. And now as I sort of get to the bottom end now, the colours, as I say, get stronger, the tonal values get stronger, and the marks get bigger. So don't be afraid to do big marks. And I thought it's high time I use my twig, and it's such good fun to use a twig. And I've just made a little bit of a puddle, and I'm just dipping it in and then just drawing out the paint, and really enjoy this as well. You feel like you're actually drawing with a pencil. It's got a lovely feeling of freedom to it, and I love using my twig. Remember, this is just a little twig from the garden, and I've just sharpened it with a little pencil sharpener. There's nothing fancy going on here, and I'm just putting in as much detail as I can. This is such a busy area, so I want to create lots and lots of texture. So guess what's coming? Yes, it's a little bit of spattering. So I'm just spattering a little bit of yellow to begin with. I want to really fill this meadow up with lots of flowers, so I'm just using basically a lot of the colours I've already got left over in the palette, and just using a little size 4, size 6 brush, and just spatter those sort of darker greens and yellows all onto your surface of the paper. If you don't want it to run too much, just make sure you have it, give it a blow dry before you do this stage. So I'm just going mad with this. Remember as well, just put some kitchen towel over your sky and trees in the background, because it's really difficult to get off all those little watercolour spots. So I'm really just going mad with it, really. I can't stop myself, but I just love spattering, especially for something like this. It's ideal because you've got all these little flowers. Now I'm actually just swapped my little palettes here because I just wanted some clean pink. So this is the permanent rose, and I'm just spattering this now all over the meadow just to create some lovely tiny little pink flowers. So I blow dried my painting, and I've removed all of the masking fluid. So now you can just enjoy and paint your spring flowers in this meadow. Starting off wet on dry, but you can drop in some colours wet on wet as well to make some deeper colours, as what I'm doing here with the permanent rose. And you can sort of vary the tonal value, so you can drop in a bit of water, just some paint, and then some thicker, creamier paint to sort of create some darks and lights on these flowers. So the yellow centres are still wet, and I'm just using a damp brush to draw them out a little bit. And it's quite a nice little technique, and you don't have to do too much colour mixing here. It's all there already. It's a way of softening them. They don't just look like they've got a yellow centre and then just white petals. So it's finessing them a little bit. So I'm using a little bit of the ultramarine and the pink now, just to put a little bit of dark just at the bottom of some of those blooms, just so it creates a little bit of 3D, a bit of contrast here and there, just to really build up the depth in the painting, the depth and the detail. There is a lot of detail here, so don't try to rush this painting, try to enjoy it. So I'm using my twig again just to dip in some of that darker green, just to put some stems in here and there. And I'm just mixing a little bit now of the violet with a touch of yellow to paint around the centres of some of the daisies, especially in the foreground, to create again a little bit more detail, and it just brings them to life a little bit more. And I'm using the size 4 brush, but as you can see, it really does bring them to life. Now I mixed up a dark green, that's the indigo, with the cadmium yellow, and I'm painting this plant with the size 4 brush very delicately, so it's quite dark. So if you don't want to put this in, don't put it in. So I'm just using the tip of that now just to paint some darker grasses in the rest of the meadow there. Using my size 4 brush with a mixture of indigo with a touch of yellow, painting wet on dry with larger grasses nearer to the foreground, smaller ones further back. And I almost forgot to paint the branch because I was so busy with all the flowers. So I'm using the size 2 brush here and just painting in this branch. It isn't in the photograph, I know, but I really felt that it needed something to lead the eye through and to balance. You don't have to put this in if you feel that you're happy with where your painting looks. And I'm just using a little bit of green now, the indigo and yellow, to pop in some little leaves. One thing I like about these black velvet brushes, when you do press down to do leaves and things like that, you do get a lovely sort of mark. Just adding a few more details here and there, wet on dry. So I'm just spattering some yellow now, just some lovely yellow flowers. Why not? just some cadmium yellow with a tiny touch of pink to warm up that yellow, and just go for it. If you don't like the spattering technique or don't like too much of it, you don't have to do this stage, but do remember to cover your background. I'm going to remove the framing tape now, and you can really assess if you need to do any more to your painting, and it just stops me from overworking and maybe spoiling a good watercolour. Now I thought this plant needed a bit more light. I'm using the yellow to bring it forward so it's light against the dark background, and I thought with the foreground flowers just to put a touch of detail in there just so they don't look flat. Again, you don't have to do this, I just thought a tiny touch here and there just to finish off my painting. So I really hope you enjoyed this step-by-step spring meadow tutorial. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section. And if you'd like to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And if you want to get access to my exclusive weekly tutorials, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? Details about the membership can be found in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.